right. Hello. Welcome, everyone. I'm David Bernstein. I'm the founder of the Jewish Institute for Liberal Values, and this is the Contrarians podcast. I've had the pleasure of having Bill Kolbrener on a couple times so far. Bill and I taught together at the Institute for the it's very early in the morning here. The Institute for the Study of Global Anti-Semitism and Policy. ISCAP is always such a mouthful. In Oxford, and got to know each other there. And we've been reflecting deeply on what's happening in Israel. Bill is in Jerusalem, and I'm in the Washington, D.C. area. So we're obviously bringing two very different standpoints, but maybe some common sensibilities to the discussion. And, Bill, I thought we would start today with sort of, a reflection on what's happening with the hostages and its meaning, and also its security implications for Israel. I'm torn, and you shouldn't be torn in a way. You should be very unapologetically happy that people are being returned to their families, and I am, of course, I'm ecstatic. But at the same time, I worry that it compromises Israel's ability to fight this very necessary war that is also in the interest of all its people. And Yossi Klein Halevi wrote something about this that I thought captured my sentiment in a way, which is that October 7th was, in a way, a betrayal of the Israeli people by its own establishment in two ways, not one, two related ways. One was, of course, it didn't do what it needed to do to defend its people, and it lost the sense of deterrence, and it left collectively it left people vulnerable. But also in that failure, it allowed its people to be taken captive, and that was also a betrayal of sort of its people. It had to make amends on both counts, not just one. And so that gave me a framework for thinking about it and saying, okay, Israel has two competing interests here. And one can't really be completely above the other because both emerged from the same mitzav, the same situation. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, first of all, good morning, David, and thanks for having me on.
Yeah, that was a mouthful before we got to good morning.
Yeah. I'm also not going to answer your question, contrarian that I am, right away. I don't know how you just got up. I mean, there was a terrorist attack at the entrance to the city of Jerusalem this morning. So one person was...
I checked my Twitter and I didn't see it in there.
Well, there you go. So this has been a morning of... Exactly. And, I felt... So one more time, a shooter came out of a car. The video is unfortunately available, and started shooting at people waiting at the bus stop at the entrance to Jerusalem. As I've said to everybody, I know, if you lived in Jerusalem, you have stood at that bus stop, right? And it turns out, right now I'm at the Hebrew University in Givat Ram, that, I took my train as usual to 200 meters within that area, right? Everything is so proximate. And of course, as soon as you hear this news, right, it's rush hour, you think, what kids do I have who are out, right? Who might be there now? There's not a single parent in Jerusalem who didn't do that, right? I guarantee that. That's terror, by the way. So to me, that just serves as a kind of punctuation point. I will tell you, David, and I'm not an expert on politics, but there's no way this country is not going back to war. No way. The sentiment here is so powerful. It's interesting, actually, because over the past few days, getting back to the hostages, we've been in this limbo stage. And every day, we're reliving the trauma. As I'm sure to some extent you are as well. But here it's a national narrative. The family of the woman and her two children, is she alive? Is she not alive? And speaking of ISGAP, they just released a report, one of the first of many, showing that Qatari money has infested our universities. So what we are seeing right now is an organized psychological warfare against the Jewish people. It's against you in America, and it's against us here. And you know, we know it's happening, and they're doing it to us anyway. But my feeling just is, as you said, there are. I'm not at Yossi Kleiner Levy's level at the moment, because I can't even speculate about anything right now. I think we feel so viscerally the threat to Jewish survival. I think that we're thinking about is, are we getting any more hostages? If not, we're going to go back to killing you. I know there's a lot of talking heads talking about other things, but you heard it here first, folks. You know, I'm pretty sure this is happening.
No, I appreciate that, and I think that's a very keen insight. You know, there's a lot of people here who speculate that that this interruption in the war will build enough momentum on the part of a ceasefire that will get Israel to start to back down. They don't maybe think that Israel's going to immediately end it, but that this spells the end of the war. But what you're saying is, the Israeli public wants this war to be followed through with. That wants this war to dismantle Hamas, and it's not going to be content with anything less than that. And no Israeli government that's doing the bidding of the people is going to be able to resist the will of the people in this situation, the overwhelming will of the people. I think and some, to be honest with you, and I it's good to hear, because look, as any Jew who's ever lived in the diaspora feels the pressure of the isolation and the sense that we're being judged by the elites of our society, or that we're going to, or Israel's going to be frowned upon. But what happened on October 7th to me minimized that to almost zero. I don't care. Right. I care, but I really don't give a damn. I care in some ways, because I know I'm dealing with whatever fallout it is. But overwhelmingly, I want Israel to finish the job and be safe. And that covers up all those other insecurities about being a Jew in the diaspora, worried about how we're being perceived by society. I want Israel to be safe.
I was going to really repeat that we do not feel safe now. People in Israel do not feel safe. I'm here on the Hebrew University campus at Givat Ram. The old National Library, it's moved to a new building, is now being used as a school from kids from Sderot. Now, they've been here for now almost 8 weeks. What are they going to do, right? I mean, it's not, nobody is thinking about this. We have to make the people in the South able to go back to their homes. There are 200,000 people who are displaced.
Right.
This is, I'm going back to our first conversations, David, and we talked about the conflict we often feel between commitment and nuance, right? And I think we're both feeling a little bit less committed to nuance at the moment.
Right.
Because we have re-entered history. We've always been in it. We just didn't fully realize it. This is the big shock, I think, for America, because you're not ready for history, right? I mean, me, an American who's been living here for 30 years, I'm not ready for it. But I'm just saying there's a tsunami of anti-Semitism that is going to envelop America. I'm sorry for my Jeremiah, but it just seems to me to be, when we see clarity, we have to say it.
Yeah, there are times definitely when good generalizations matter more than good distinctions. And knowing when those are, sometimes when you fight a war, for example, you need good generalizations. You need the conceptual ability to say, these are the threats. I'm not going to spend a lot of time splitting Talmudic hairs here. I'm going to fight the threats that are in front of me, and there'll be a time to return to the nuanced brain, but now's not it. Of course, we all need to stop and pause sometimes, even during those periods, to make sure to check ourselves, of course, because those sentiments can overwhelm us, and they can be dangerous to us as individuals and collectively when we allow them. I remember during the buildup to the Iraq War, this is after 9/11, and I would have made similar arguments then. Although, while it was all happening, it was very strange because it seemed like the policymakers planning the war in Iraq were not really paying attention to what happened to Iraq afterwards. And there was this prevailing assumption that the Iraqi people were going to welcome Americans with open arms, and it was going to become a democracy. And you could hear from people saying, I don't think that they have a plan. And I said, no. They have a plan. In other words, someone is doing the nuance thinking. Somebody's splitting the hairs. Somebody's doing the planning. It just doesn't have to be me at this moment, because I'm there to root on what needs to be done to take on the jihadists and the extremists and everyone else who was going to do us harm. And then I realized, of course, that didn't happen. And so, yeah, that's the tricky part here. But I do agree with you that I think good generalizations serve a purpose at times, and this is one of those times.
I think you suffer a little bit from the burden of distance, and I think the burden of distance is both a comfort, but also a burden.
Yeah,
that whole conversation you just had in your head, right? We need generalizations because, like, we need guns. Right, we need them now.
Yeah, guns are generalizing.
Right, and then, you know what? Sometimes bad things happen with guns because war is really something we really rather avoid. And I think we have become so accustomed to, as good Jews, as Talmudic Jews, what's the other side, right? It's not even an intellectual move. It's just how we think. We always see the other perspective. And that doesn't serve us at the moment. And here, there is a sense of I would say really quiet determination. I'll just tell you, I haven't gone to funerals lately, thank God, because of the ceasefire. I live near Har Herzl. There are funerals there all the time. I went to the one of the school principal. There are thousands of people there, thousands. And it was scheduled to begin at 6, and it began instead at 6:45. For 45 minutes, there was total silence. Silence. So I felt at that moment, oh, this is what Jewish unity is, right? Jewish unity is not running around with flags, right, and screaming at the top of our lungs, right? Jewish unity is determination in the face of death. That's Jewish courage. Twice in the Torah, it says, Joshua is told, be strong and of good courage. And both times are after the death of Moses, right? Or one in Joshua, one in Deuteronomy. And when we face death, when we mourn, part of our responsibility is courage. And I think that's a word we have to relearn. We have to relearn courage, because David, the war is not to be won alone by the armies, right? There's a lot of work that has to be done for the people of Israel. I'm not even talking about America, just the people of Israel. Right. So that's why what we're doing now is so important.
Yeah. So that brings up a very interesting point, one that I've been struggling with a lot. Safetyism is one of the prevailing mindsets on both the American college campus, but also in sort of the larger therapeutic state. And
I love that, the therapeutic state. It's very good, David.
Yeah,
I like that.
I didn't coin it, but I don't know who did. I just know that I've heard it somewhere else. And it seems to me that on the one hand, it's very tempting to tap into that ourselves. So when we're dealing with young Jews on campus, we want to play the safetyist card and say they're not safe. And in some cases, they're really not safe. I mean, there are places where they're being physically accosted, or they're being escorted to classes, or and so it's not that safetyism is some made up, not feeling safe is something made up. It's just some of them are genuinely not safe. On the other hand, I worry a little bit that when you stress that too much, you don't build up resilience in yourselves. You don't create conditions for courage. You don't bring out the fighter in you that needs to be there in these circumstances. I think Israelis are in sort of the reality, the existential condition that they have no choice but not to give into safetyism in some ways, because it's just not safe. And there's things that they need to do to fight a war, whereas American Jews,
mm,
can retreat into that to a degree, and I worry about that. I was a pro-Israel activist in college, um, and a friend of mine who now works with me at the Jewish Institute for Liberal Values, we took
mm,
our Israeli flag and walked into the middle of a Palestinian protest and unfurled it there and opened it up,
mm,
and and then a guy came with a Palestinian flag. It was raining, and he whipped my friend across the face with it. And click, there was a camera that took a picture of it. I actually have the press clippings from this. If anybody doesn't believe me, I can always put it in the show notes or whatever. And there we are, in age, I don't know, 21, with it, and we thought it was amazing. Like, it wasn't, our instinct wasn't that we were all of a sudden unsafe, but wow, that we just pulled off the greatest PR stunt of all time. And I'm worried that not enough young Jewish students, not that everybody needs to feel that way, not everybody's cut out for what we did in today or then, but I'm worried that not enough young Jewish students are going to be taught to be fighters in the fight that we have here, which is different in character than the fight that you have in Israel.
So I would just ask you, what is the way that we create resilience? I mean, I'm as concerned about what's happening on American campuses as I am concerned about here. How does one cultivate that now?
Yeah, I think we need we need to do two things at once that are in tension with each other in a way. One is we have to absolutely insist that university presidents step up to the plate and protect Jewish students. And one of the most maddening things, I just hit the roof when at MIT, a group of radical Palestinian students who did step over the line. It's not that they just protested and yelled chants, but physically accosted people, weren't disciplined because they were worried that those students would be kicked out of the university. So I want to tell you, the university president, F you, and be very aggressive with them, and say you must protect your students. And on the other hand, give this message to our own community. This is not just about safetyism; it's about voice, and it's about dignity of the Jewish people. And it's not even, and it's funny because I'm contradicting everything I did for like 20 years. It's not even about effectiveness. It's about dignity. I took over an organization in 2010 called the David Project, which was a pro-Israel education and advocacy training program. And I taught students to be effective in their work. I said, look, this is not about dignity. It's about you going out there and building relationships to the most powerful students on campus, the student government leaders, the head of the African American Student Union, the environmental group, and learn how to talk to them, tell your story, don't argue with them, tell your story, bring them to Israel, we'll pay for it, blah, blah, blah. And it actually worked well for a while until it stopped working because things got too radical. But I was the one who was the most skeptical of sort of the dignity school. Like I said, oh, enough hummus, parties, enough tabling, go out and do the real work of advocacy, which is to influence people and win friends. And now here I am, post October 7th, saying, I don't care if you win friends. I want you to be good Jews and to stand up for the dignity of the Jewish people and yourselves. And I think, and we'll deal with the political fallout later. But it's a different mentality about it. It tells you how much things have shifted. And it's a different, I wrote a piece last week in Sapir, like it was something like 7 things that changes that the Jewish advocacy, Jewish community relations world should make. It was called Jewish Community Relations and the October 8th Jew. And I think for the first time in a long time, I argued that it's not about politics here. It's not about influencing market segments of the population. It's really about knowing who we are, and then working with our friends, of course, like the people who care about us. But that may be a few people, and that's fine. I don't need to be part of your damn coalition. That's fine.
Right. David, you asked the most interesting questions, and I'm really, really interested in what you're saying about this relationship between dignity and voice. First of all, I would say the first thing you said has to be the given about presidents of universities being held responsible politically, legally, financially to provide safety for Jews on campus.
Right.
That's a big ask. And the fact that it has not happened yet, the fact that the Brandeis letter was the biggest deal, which is one university, instead of having all university heads asking for this, that to me is terrifying. Why has this not happened? And then the second part is, and I would put it a little bit differently. We are no longer talking to people out. We are talking to each other now. We have to talk to each other. One of the things that I've been doing over the past weeks is working with my old creative writing students. As you know, we are not having classes here because 30 to 40% of our students are on reserve duty. We were supposed to start at the end of October. We may start at the end of December. Now, that's another reality.
Yeah.
And we've been using creative writing as a means to really do both of these things. And I think, meaning to create voice and dignity to me, but dignity can be internal, the dignity of the community internally. And I think that's the direction that we really have to go in. And, you want, and I think this is what we have to do, a new creative approach in synagogues, right? We have to show people, I've said this to you privately, and I'm glad I'm going to say it to you on the air. The sometimes professed atheist, David Bernstein, gives the best sermons I've ever heard in my life, right? We have been edged out of the meaningful life of faith and belief that we have. And that's because we don't have the languages for it. And we have to come together and create those languages. That's what we were saying, really. I think what you're saying is, yeah, we have to, campus safety, that's the bottom of Maslow's pyramid. But the next level is community.
Right. Community. And then, and being less caught up with our place in American society, with who likes us and who doesn't. I think if they don't like us, then fine. I don't care.
Right.
I'm not going to spend a lot of time cultivating you in that way. I'm not going to return to groveling to you to like us.
I'm hearing you differently now, and I'm seeing really that there's a kind of bravery in being in America that is absent here. Because, and I don't mean the physical violence necessarily, but to me, one of the things that I cannot imagine otherwise, I'm not finding, there are no people around me who say October 7th was a good thing. Nobody, right?
Right.
No one. And the voices that I hear, I hear the absence of voices of friends and family from America, which pains me immensely. The absence of empathy, aside from the self, the political version of self-harm that young Americans are doing to themselves. But so I think what you guys are doing is extraordinary, and it is a question really of, and we have to think together about how to provide that strength. The rabbis are not going to, I mean, some of the rabbis will, but we need innovation from everybody.
One of the other things that I've been sort of silently contemplating, and I guess when I talk to you, it's an opportunity to bring it out loud, is what to do about the wicked son. Of course, what I'm referring to, of course, is the wicked son at the Passover Seder who separates himself from his community. And, and here I'm talking about what Gil Troy and Natan Sharansky call the un-Jews. These are young Jews who aggressively call for a ceasefire, many of whom are anti-Zionist, post-Zionist, whatever you want to call them. If not now, Jewish Voices Peace. They're a louder and louder group, and some of them are children of community leaders. These are people who felt like they were supposedly sold a bill of goods, and now they've woken up. I actually have a very different theory about it, something we could also talk about down the line. So, like, too many American Jews have told their kids what to think about politics rather than how to think, and as a result, the liberal American Jew created the progressive, angry progressive Jewish child, because they taught them these values of social justice without any critical thinking skills. But that aside for a second, how to deal with the wicked son, and or whether to really devote that much energy to it at all. Like I think there's a lot of people who have really, every time I give a talk, someone will say, "What about
Yeah.
Jewish Voices for Peace?" or "If not now." And my gut, what I want to tell them, even though I don't practice what I preach, is stop your that's adversary obsession. Stop obsessing about those people. They're going to do their thing. Just go and do our thing. Let's be unified. Let's not obsess with the people that have the wicked son. But I don't know. I mean, it just doesn't feel like a full answer to me. Maybe that's my best shot at it. But what do you think about that?
Let me help you. Right. I think the Wicked Son, I think, was always the one we admired at the Pesach Seder, right? Or was most interested in it, at least, right?
Right. Most
I
interested in,
think,
right.
right. I think that we are getting accustomed to the idea that there really is something called evil in the world. In the Psalms, like I always thought, good and evil, it's so problematic, it's so essentialist, so fundamentalist. So I started reading Psalms, and I see, according to the commentators, there are two kinds of people in the world. Actually, it says the sword and the book are brought into the world at the same time. The sword is the thing, it's called the Saif, that ends things. The book is the thing that allows people to continue. So there are two kinds of people in the world. And the bad ones are the ones with the sword, who are predators, right? I'm happy with that as a good definition of evil. They are predators.
Yeah.
And the good people, the people of the book, are those who want to say, we want to keep on telling our story. And it just so happens that our story is the basis of your stories. I mean, you might not realize that fully, but that is the case. I mean, we know we're fighting for people who think we're betraying them, which is also part of the tragedy. But I think we're learning that evil is there, and we have a responsibility. And the questioning is a form of avoidance. It's a form of commitment, of a fear of commitment, and a form of avoidance. I was guilty of it myself. I don't know how I would do it in America right now either. But there is the responsibility that we feel that when we see evil in this way, there's a line in Milton's Paradise Lost: darkness visible. Darkness became visible on October 7th. We all saw it. We have tape recordings of it, right? We know what it is. It's there. We're not making it up.
Milton's been quoted a lot, by the way, since October 7th on those lines, and every time I think of you, like every time I hear that, I think of you. I think of you. Yeah, no, that in many ways, my worldview was formed less from sort of the Psalms that you just cited, although I'm sure that was in the ether, but in the contemporary Jewish experience. And obviously one aspect is the Holocaust and the understanding that there is this evil that even when the Nazis were losing the war on the Russian front, they diverted more trains from to take Jews to Auschwitz. What can you make of that? It's defies the logic in a sense, and yet that's what the Nazis chose to do at that desperate moment in a war. So I have that intellectual marker, and then of course there are this idea of culture, and cultures that either emphasize evil or emphasize goodness more or less, and I had to contemplate the fact that there were cultures that wanted to destroy, and that also formulated my worldview. So now I cannot not think about culture as a factor in why certain people thrive and others don't, because I've had that experience analyzing the conflict in Israel and understanding the Israeli experience of what they're up against and so forth. And I think that in the American experience, it's hard to look at that. It's hard to look at those factors. Like the American experience doesn't necessarily tell us those, doesn't necessarily impart those two intellectual markers that I just talked about. We're not the Holocaust is obviously a factor, and so we know about evil, but it does, it's not as intimate as it is for the Jew whose grandparent or mother or great grandparent experienced it. So
Sure.
they're not taking that in, and because we're told that it's politically incorrect or racist to talk about other cultures, we don't really have a language for that anymore. That's been shut down. That discourse has been shut down, and I think we have to find a way, even if we can't do it in the society at large, to talk about ourselves, to understand that, because if you're told that all cultures are the same, and there's
Right.
no place for talking about why overwhelming numbers of Gazans may hate Jews and want to kill them, and that they're not all, angry at Hamas for what happened, then you have to be able to talk about culture and not just structure, as everybody wants you to here, which would just point the finger at Israel and the Jews. So anyway, I know that's sort of expanding a little bit, I think, on this idea of evil, but what it means to have a language for it among ourselves, if not in the
Well,
larger society. We can try in the larger society.
that this is one of the problems now that we're having, is that since we don't have a language for it, and we don't believe that they could be that evil. And this is also, you would hear these, crazy Hamas leaders in Qatar years ago, and they'd say things about killing the Jews, and you're like, they don't really mean it, right? They're not going to really do it. And well, you know what happened? They did it. They actually did it.
Yeah.
And
The
still,
BBC reporter,
Right.
who took so much, I'm going to let you go on, but I just have to say this BBC reporter who took so much pleasure in saying Mohammed Sinwar greeted the Israeli hostages. Now, that's not something ISIS would do. I think it was a BBC reporter. It might have been another British reporter. It was so disgusting, but also
I feel like they maitre d's to a restaurant, right?
right.
They're
He was a
terrorists.
maitre d'. How bad could he be? If he's greeting Israeli hostages and saying you won't be harmed. And then you hear this Thai worker recount the horrors of being in these cells where the Israelis were being beaten with electrical cords. But it's just the gullibility of not understanding evil, not to me is frightening. And I think it may be the best that we can do right now, and I guess this is where I'm going with it. Is to get the well-meaning people among us, and to get them to understand that the best that they can, and not worry too much about the un-Jews or the wicked son or whatever else, or not to worry too much about a larger society that doesn't have a language for it. Yes, we're gonna try to give it a language, but right now, in this moment, in this time of generalities, the generality is to get ourselves to understand evil and to fight it.
I would suggest another perspective, and that's the blood libel perspective. People like me, nerds who like study cultural and intellectual history, it's like now, everything falls into place, because we thought history ended in 1945, but the distance between 1943 and 2023 doesn't turn out to be that great. So I think, and this is another hard thing to say, there is almost a cognitive build-in of the blood libel. These things that are happening on the news, the bad reporting, the misreporting, it's extraordinary. The New York Times runs on the front page, hostages released by Israel, and right, the equivalents of Israeli hostages in Gaza and terrorist security prisoners. And that goes on the front page of the Times.
Right.
So to me, there is a cognitive leaning towards just blaming the Jew. And it's hard for us to say that because we think everybody's nice and good, because we were brought up in the golden generation, where we were really, where you could go with your friend and pull the flag down and walk away, say it was a great time. It's not just that you are different, the times are different. Can't do that now.
Yeah. The writer and thinker Liel Leibovitz has been writing a lot about this, and I went back to an essay that he wrote before October 7th in Sapir. Um, and he was trying to impart, and this might have come from one afterward, actually. I'm not sure. He's trying to
Mm,
impart sort of a sensibility to the Jewish community. And one of the things he's arguing is um, that the Enlightenment is over. Okay, now this is a very I'm not I'm not necessarily with him on this, but and he goes that nice thing that we've experienced for the last couple hundred years where we were able to sort of relate to society, that's coming to an end. And
mm,
and it's time to take sides. So this is into the generalization. Like this is you're either a Zionist or an anti-Zionist. You know, maybe this sounds like Ibram X. Kendi. You're either a racist or anti-racist. You're either a Zionist or an anti-Zionist. Be a Zionist and stop the endless hair splitting. I mean, you can obviously in certain circumstances, but just be on your team. Come be on your team in a full way, and and know that that's not the period we're entering into. That the Jewish condition is fundamentally altered, and maybe people just haven't gotten the memo yet. Now,
oh, I think, yeah, I think just the extent of denial in America is extraordinary. And I
right.
think
But
that,
wait, one last point before that. I just want to say, I'm not sure I want to go along with the Enlightenment is over. And um, because I worry that if he's right, and he absolutely could be right, that's actually a very scary set of conditions for Jews, and that we should fight very hard to restore the Enlightenment to and and but I worry, and the answer to that question, which you can't answer because we don't know, but
mm,
governs what we should do and how we should think about ourselves in the world. I'm sorry, I cut you off.
no, it's fine. It's fine. I mean, I think there are two different issues here. One is the political issue. And I think somebody speculated to me that American Judaism is going to basically cease to be. There are going to be Orthodox communities like in Lakewood, right? And this is obviously a dystopian view. There'll be communities of Orthodox Jews in Lakewood, and it will be like old medieval or early modern aristocrats who protect their Jews because they need them for certain things, and they would be safe. Basically, it would be a return to ghettos.
Right.
So that is for me just really, really alarming. But the Enlightenment issue, we have to stop, and this is we have to pursue in any way that we can the continuation of what you're calling enlightenment in our community. I'm starting to sound like the rabbis of the Talmud who always say over and over and over again, the Jewish people are strong when they're unified. And I'm getting that now, right?
Yeah.
It's because unity, we misunderstand unity. Because we think unity again is everybody agreeing. Unity is even when we disagree, we're fighting the same cause. We have the same fundamental beliefs. So we need to reinvent our sense of community and strengthen ourselves. And for that, we need enlightenment. Whether we can be a light to the nations in that sense, who knows? But I think for us, it's a matter of survival.
Yeah, I think that's right. And at least when you have enlightenment, you're playing the old role of the light unto the nations. You're the remnant of those values that you hold dear, and that civilization must be built upon for it to thrive, even if everybody else has abandoned it for some
Yeah.
tribalistic or grievance that they hold. Yeah, and I think I think we're dealing with a story that's still unfolding. We don't, and that's why this is hard. Like, I mean, we just had this whiplash of Israel being on the brink of coming apart at the seams, and all of a sudden, the most unified country we've ever seen, and that's an amazing feeling in some ways, even if it's under the conditions. And so what is obviously there's going to have to be some kind of synthesis And what that's going to be like in Israel, it's hard to know. I'm drawing on Hegel here, sort of, thesis, antithesis, synthesis. And I think that when you're dealing with things that are so diametrically opposed, that those conditions have to sort of work themselves out in society. And for the Jew in the diaspora, I think we're dealing with sort of the couple things. One is this question about what is the future of our societies, and then what is the future of us within those societies. One of the things that's been very interesting for me, sometimes I forget, not everybody's been struggling with sort of the knowledge that there are ideologies afoot that are dangerous for society and dangerous for our people. Everybody agrees with that, but it's always, a lot of the people in the Jewish community just think it's MAGA or Trump or whatever. And I'm trying to get them to understand that no, that's not your only set of threats. So I've been struggling with this for years and years, and built an organization around and wrote about it and everything else. And then I sit at a table with a group of Israeli friends, and they haven't lived in the United States all that long, and they're in a state of sort of shock. And it's shock, obviously, what happened in Israel, and then shock at how people are reacting in the United States, because they didn't really understand that. There was nothing in their experience being in the U.S. that made them understand it. And then of a bunch of American Jewish progressives who thought that they were much more secure in their coalitions, who looked the other way while this ideology spread, and now are in a state of shock too, that many of the people that they thought were their friends weren't really their friends. And so
I want to, first of all, I want to do is I want to throw Hegel out the window, because Hegel's just even for me at the hour, it's too hard for me. I mentioned before this writing workshop that I had, some of the participants were the leftiest Israelis that you could imagine. Every single anti-government protest. They are working so hard right now for the survival of Israel. To me, that's why you don't need the thesis. It's embodied in the person. They are the future leaders, I think. And all of a sudden they're discovering, wow, I'm a Zionist, right? Hamas made a mistake, right? They send missiles to Tel Aviv primarily. They killed the children of people from Tel Aviv, right? They're not Jerusalem kids who went to that rave. If this had happened and it was Jerusalem, hypothetically, it's not hard to convince people on the right to go to war. They convince people on the left to go to war. It's people on the left in Tel Aviv who are the most determined. It's extraordinary to see. It really is.
Let me bring up something that might be distinct but related. I'm reading reports now that are more explicit than they were before about what had happened before October 7th, with various people reporting intelligence, young Israeli women on the front lines in Gaza, making very explicit reports that they were going to be attacked, and then these seemingly arrogant Israeli officers, downplaying it, and the power of groupthink that obviously took over in segments of the IDF. And I was talking to somebody about this who actually lives in Israel, and he said, yeah, the IDF and Israelis tend to be more prone to groupthink than in a lot of other places I've been. This is a person who's been in the upper echelons of government in the United States as well, and is a political scientist, and sees it. He says and obviously you saw this in the 73 war and the lead up to the 73 war, and you saw this in the lead up to October 7th. And I'm maybe I'm saying this because I'm trying to, because that strikes me as intuitively right, as somebody who spent a lot of time in Israel, around Israelis, that Israeli leaders or elite circles or whatever, who have sort of common experiences in many ways, are very susceptible to groupthink, which you would think they wouldn't be, because they're Jews, and Jews are aversive naturally, but whatever reason that it shuts down under certain circumstances, and also sort of while Israel is experiencing this moment of unity and that we're partying, to leave some space in our collective consciousness to be a little bit aversive, just so we don't lose that in ourselves. I mean, it's wonderful and we need it, and we have to fight a war, and we have to also remind ourselves not to be overtaken by groupthink ourselves. anyway, I started with that, and I felt like that still gnaws at me every time I think about. And it's like breaking the glass at a wedding. You know what I'm saying? You know.
I very infrequently talk about politics, but I do talk about politics with my barber, and he's
Uh-huh.
been consistently sensible about things.
Uh-huh.
And what he says, and this really reflects your perceptions, your observations, is that when all this is over, everybody has to go. Everybody, right? Not that Gantz is going to stick around, not that Bennett may come back. They all have to go. It's all David. This is,
This
you
is
know,
40 years in the desert.
we,
You got to die out. You guys have to. They had to die out. This leadership.
right. And for us, as much as we recognize the tragic circumstances, which we always have to say, it is now an opportunity for us to cultivate real leadership in the Jewish community.
Yeah, I think that's right. By the way, I would say the same about the American Jewish community. I'm watching an American Jewish leadership that's almost constitutionally incapable, in my view, of rising to the occasion. Now, not like look, there are moments, and there are moments of leadership that I've seen from the leadership, but there's also sort of an allegiance to the conventions of a past era, of a pre-October 7th era, where the impulse to reconcile with all these forces in society just remains so strong, and that they're not able to break with that. And I feel like
David,
that needs.
or organizations are not nimble. I was at a Tel Aviv gathering of people who are fighting anti-Semitism, NGOs, and I was struck by how none of them, this is before October 7th, none of them have any sense of, they're not connected to reality. They're connected to the conventions that keep them in place, to fundraising and all of those things. That's why I think we need some new organizations. We need new leadership. We need organizations to be nimble and not to hang around and have everything go in front of the board. We can't do that anymore.
Right. And when that happens, by the way, it makes it impossible to actually address the issues at hand. Like, one of the reasons why I have had a hard time sometimes getting my message out there about the dangers of progressive ideology in the Jewish world is the boardroom. Is exactly what you're saying, is that somebody has veto power over the conversation and it never happens. And you have to work really hard to sort of circumvent the 3 or 4 people who say, over my dead body, are we going to talk about wokeism or whatever?
Right.
And
yeah. I would just say, I think I'm just understanding things a little bit better. And you and I are in very different circumstances. You are obviously probably the best person in the world to find out if any of those people who have been dislodged from their woke perspective, to bring them back to reality, right? So I think my emphatic sense of, we need to talk to each other and say goodbye to people who aren't our, close friends. I think you have a particular opportunity because you know their language so well, right? That you can't, they're not going to gravitate towards Hasbara and to Trump, right? Right. That's what we also have to
and
prove
we can't
to
make
people.
those
We
their
are
choices.
not, no, Israel and Trump are not the same.
Right.
Exactly.
Right. Yeah. And that's right. And and I would say the jury's out. Yeah, I do get a lot of that. I listen very carefully. I know the people who were part of the old order who, want to sort of stifle my voice or other voices like mine. And I'm listening. I'm saying, how are they talking about this now? And I hear some things that I like and hear things that I don't like. So I'm seeing both of those things at once. I think there's still a lot of cognitive dissonance over this, about its meaning, about how to rethink reality and rethink what we do. I hear the right things from some people that I'm very pleased in, and I very quick slippage back into sort of pre-October 7th thinking, among others. And I don't know what will win out. So I'm trying to win out. I mean, not just me. I'm trying to get people to engage in the great, strategic reset. But it's a work in progress, and we have a long way to go, and obviously it's not going to be perfect, but it's about sort of shifting the center of the consensus. It's not like getting unanimity there. It's not going to be like in Israel, everybody has to agree to fight the war. because we're not even sure who our enemies are here. It's, you know, it's less settled what war we're fighting or which wars we should be fighting. And there's a cross currents, you know, there's the threat of MAGA and Trump and everything else. And so that affects the way people are going to absorb the lessons as well. But what I want is the center of gravity to shift. So that the dominant theme is
David, you know why it's going to shift? It's going to shift because circumstances are going to demand. There is no pre-October 7th reality, not in Israel, not in America, not any place in the world. It's just, and also I love seeing comments on my social media in which some progressive left-wing anti-Semite says something, and then it's liked by some right-wing fascist Trump person. Right?
Yeah.
You know, the extremes, they come together, they agree on one thing: hatred of us, right? So I look at images from, you know, November 29th, yesterday, in front of Rockefeller Plaza, Rockefeller Center, the Christmas tree gets put up, and the Palestinians decide that they're going to go there. And I thought to myself, well, aren't they overplaying their hand a little bit? I mean,
yes,
you know,
they
New
are,
Yorkers,
they might not be,
they may not be, you know, Christians, but we like the trees. We like the tree. Right. We like the lights.
I like the trees. Right.
We like the tree, right? But I think they're not over. I think they are going for total chaos. I think for them, I think they want just to escalate, and they will. And listen, maybe I'm wrong. I see Mehdi Hassan kind of pouring oil onto me, like the good Muslims. Linda Sarsour, of course, the good Muslims, right? They're also starting to agitate. What happens when Black Lives Matter? What happens when the war starts again? Is that going to be isolated?
It's going to be ugly here. But no, I mean, yeah, and you know, and again, I have two stories going through my head at once when I see what happened at Rockefeller Center. One is with enemies like that, who needs friends, right? I mean, you know, like go, you know, you do you know, go ahead and disrupt the Christmas tree ceremony. Let people see how crazy you are and what Israel's up against. So that's right. One instinct. And the other is, you know, agitation can work, you know, and you know, terrorism works, as we've seen before. So, you know, maybe they know something that I don't about this, but you know, maybe we should pick up that next time and see where we are, see how we think that how American society and other societies are dealing with their own protesters. Look, in the United States, it's not as dangerous fundamentally as it is in Europe, even walking around potentially violent protests. You know, my friend Asra Nomani, who's a Muslim woman who's pro-Israel, went with her IDF sweatshirt to some protests and didn't get beat up. I think in London she would have been beat up.
Oh, for sure. Trade unions.
Right, exactly. I think she would have been beat up in London. I think she would have been beat up in France, but she wasn't beat up in the United States, even though obviously others have been. But I just think that America still is different than there, and we may have to, when we're looking at these challenges, not generalize too much, because the situation in Europe, I think, is fundamentally more tenuous than it is in the United States. All right, Bill, I'm so glad we had this conversation. I feel like, as always, I'm able to sort of think out loud and have a great partner to do that with. And, you know, we should do this again soon.
Let's do it after the war starts again.
Yeah. Well, when's that going to be? 2-3 days?
I don't know.
Okay.
I don't know.
All right. Well,
thank you, David.
Be well. All right.